It's unlikely that there are people in the world who have never faced rejection. The only difference is that some take it calmly and move on, while others remember the rejection for the rest of their lives. What do you think a rejected man is capable of? And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. I just wanted to see her naked. That's how the man who took the life of a girl he had been obsessed with for 5 years explained his actions. A wave of rage overwhelmed him completely. How dare Alicia say such a thing? He paced around the room, thinking of ways to hurt the one who had dared to reject him. That year was supposed to be the most significant one for the young university student. 2 major events were ahead that could completely change her life. But the girl's trip to a wedding as a companion ended in tragedy. The events of today's story take place in August 2012 in Plainfield, a town in Will and Kendall counties in the state of Illinois, USA. Let's go back more than 12 years. In front of you is 21-year-old Alicia Bromfield. Alicia was born on August 28, 1990, to Sherry and James in the city of Joliet, Illinois. Joliet was located about 15 kilometers from Plainfield. Alicia was one of 5 children, but despite any hardships, she always found a reason to enjoy life. The girl approached any problems with laughter and lightness, and her optimism was contagious. With younger siblings, she was used to solving her problems on her own and not bothering her parents over little things. It was this very habit that cost her her life. At the time of the incident, Alicia was a graduate of Joliet Catholic Academy and a student at Western Illinois University. She had just a couple of months left before earning her degree in criminal justice and forensic psychology. Since childhood, she had dreamed of a legal career and was rapidly moving toward her goal. However, that wasn't the only significant upcoming event in her life. Alicia was soon to become a mother. She was 6 months pregnant. At the same time, she was preparing to become a single mother while building a career in forensic psychology. Alicia had met a guy in college. They had dated for some time. But when she got pregnant, her boyfriend, the father of the child, did not want to take responsibility for the baby and broke up with Alicia, leaving her to deal with the situation on her own. Still, Alicia wasn't going to let it get her down. Of course, she was scared to be left alone with a newborn in her arms. But she had a good support system, including family and friends. She was already prepared to fight through whatever difficulties might come her way. Alicia was over the moon when she found out the gender of her baby. She was going to have a girl. Alicia had even chosen a name for her little one, Ava Lucille. She couldn't wait to finally meet her daughter. The young woman was emotionally prepared for motherhood. She knew money would be tight, considering the fact that she had only one source of income to support both herself and the baby. So, throughout her pregnancy, Alicia was buying baby clothes and other items she would need when Ava was born. Bottles, diapers, little sweaters, and onesies. Alicia was very lucky with her job. She worked as a florist at a garden center, decorating the storefront of a flower shop and making bouquets for customers. At the same time, she was able to combine college with her job, which was seasonal. In the winter, the student had time off, but she still received a regular paycheck, as that period was considered paid leave. Alicia had worked at the garden center for about 6 years, starting in her teenage years. Baby Ava Lucille was expected to arrive in early winter 2012. That was exactly when final exams at the university would be over and her vacation from work would begin. The expectant mother was very fortunate to have the chance to gradually adjust to her new role and spend the first months after the birth with her child. After that, she planned to return to work at the garden center. And once Ava Lucille was a little older, she could begin building her legal career. It seemed that 21-year-old Alicia Bromfield's life was moving in the right direction. She had many important milestones ahead that she was eagerly anticipating, from earning her degree in forensic psychology to welcoming her baby girl into the world. And Alicia truly was happy. But she would never get to experience the most significant moments of her life because in the summer of 2012, she became the victim of a truly horrific crime. On the morning of Sunday, August 19th, 2012, a 36-year-old man walked into a gas station in Door County, Wisconsin, and approached an employee. For some reason, his clothes were soaking wet. The stranger asked the gas station worker if he could use the phone to call emergency services, 911, to report an emergency. The employee dialed the number himself, and when the operator answered, he handed the phone to the strange visitor. That's when the man in the soaking wet clothes said he wanted to report a crime. He confessed that the previous evening he had taken the life of a young pregnant woman in a hotel room. The dispatcher asked if it had been an accident, to which the man calmly replied that it had been done intentionally. He then added that actually he was a good person, except for what he had done the night before. Alicia's family would be devastated to learn that she was no longer alive, because she was the young woman whose murder the strange man had just reported in the phone call. Who was this mysterious man standing in soaking wet clothes at the gas station? And how did a pregnant girl end up in a hotel room in a resort town in Door County, Wisconsin? Brian Cooper was 36 years old. He was 15 years older than Alicia and was her direct supervisor. Alicia worked as a florist, while Brian Cooper was a regional manager for the garden centers of a retail company. They had worked together for about 5 years. At first, Cooper seemed to Alicia like a very nice and friendly person. He directly managed her work, kept track of her schedule, and oversaw her responsibilities. They got along very well and soon became good friends. Sometimes Alicia even walked his dog, which is why she had a key to Brian's house. When she first started working at the garden center, she was still a teenager and would jump at any chance to earn some money. The request from her boss to look after his pet and take it for walks felt like a way to please him and earn a small reward at the same time. She had no idea what was really behind that seemingly innocent request. But it soon became clear that Brian liked Alicia more than just as a friend. He clearly had romantic feelings for her, despite the significant age difference. He would often make inappropriate comments about her, and sometimes introduced Alicia to new employees as his girlfriend, even though there had never been any romantic relationship between them. He used his authority and job position to control nearly every aspect of her life, constantly trying to get closer to her. Brian repeatedly tried to lure her into the back storage area under the pretense of work matters, only to try and kiss her. He would call and text her on weekends. He would get angry and jealous if he saw her talking to other male co-workers, and sometimes wouldn't even let her take a lunch break if he found out she wouldn't be eating alone. Brian made it clear in every possible way that he was physically attracted to Alicia. Despite all this, Alicia never reciprocated his feelings. She constantly rejected her boss's advances and tried to stay under the radar so as not to provoke him. The thing was, this job suited her perfectly because of its seasonal nature. She could study peacefully and still earn a decent income. Besides, she had started working there when she was only 16. She enjoyed working with flowers, enjoyed interacting with customers. The only thing she didn't like was that Brian kept pushing for a relationship. At such a young age, her boss seemed almost like an old man to her, and Alicia found his advances unpleasant. But in her youthful naivety, she believed that sooner or later Brian's desire would fade and he would leave her alone. Alicia wasn't in a position, either in age or circumstance, to properly put her boss in his place and set clear personal boundaries. She knew that her continued employment at the garden center depended directly on Brian. On top of that, Alicia wasn't exactly confrontational. Her gentle and non-confrontational nature likely gave him even more reason to believe that the student was just playing hard to get. In reality, Alicia had made several attempts to explain to Brian that she wasn't attracted to him as a man, that it was inappropriate to use his position of power, and that she had completely different preferences when it came to men. But she always did this with her usual delicacy and friendliness, not wanting to turn Brian against her, and so she never achieved any real results. After failing to gain her affection, Her boss became incredibly cruel and began to openly abuse his position. He moved from persistent advances to verbal abuse, yelling and cursing at Alicia over the slightest thing, and even calling her awful names like whore and easy woman, though in much cruder terms. He could insult her right in front of customers, causing her to run off to the back room in tears. Upper management at the company was fully aware of the regional manager's inappropriate behavior, but took no action against him. According to court documents, Alicia had filed multiple complaints about Brian Cooper and his misconduct, but nothing was done. He wasn't fired or even suspended. He was simply asked to complete an anger management course, and no one even bothered to check if he had followed through with it. Alicia felt trapped in a job she loved, working under a boss she despised, who controlled her every move. She did her job well, and considering she was only 21 years old and about to become a single mother, the job was especially important to her. Time went on, but the man didn't stop. Sometimes he would change tactics and return to being the caring, understanding friend. And sometimes he would transform into a beast, not just yelling, but even throwing objects at her in fits of rage. Worst of all, because of his position, Brian could easily assign Alicia to a work trip and go with her himself. She tried to set boundaries, but it didn't go well. She was afraid to tell her parents, believing she had to handle the problem on her own, and often felt alone and defenseless in the face of her threatening boss. Alicia understood that if she wanted to keep her job, she needed to find a way to get along with him, and she tried to act gently so she wouldn't end up without a means to support herself. The more she tried to stay out of Brian's way, the more complaints he had about her, and the more twisted his demands became. It was precisely out of fear of losing her job that Alicia ended up in the situation that led to the tragedy. Her pregnancy didn't deter her boss. He still wanted Alicia to be his girlfriend, and knowing that the young employee was preparing to become a mother and needed extra income, Brian threatened to fire her or cut her hours if she didn't comply with his demands. Brian would deliberately schedule a shift for the same day Alicia had a doctor's appointment, forcing her to change her plans. She only had to hold on for a couple more months before going on maternity leave, and it seemed she was willing to endure some inconvenience and turn a blind eye to her boss's behavior to make it to that point. In August 2012, Brian began persuading Alicia to accompany him to his sister's wedding in a neighboring state as his guest. His sister was getting married in Wisconsin, and Brian was supposed to walk her down the aisle. He assured his employee that he simply needed friendly support, nothing more. But when Alicia refused, he once again threatened to fire her. Fearing the thought of losing her job, Alicia agreed, but only on the condition that they stay in separate hotel rooms. She really didn't want to go, but now that she was expecting a baby, she couldn't afford to lose her job. Above all, Alicia was thinking of her daughter. Deep down, she hoped that maybe this trip would somehow soften Brian's harsh demeanor and that he would stop bothering her, at least for a while. Either way, early in the morning on Saturday, August 18, 2012, Brian and Alicia left Plainfield, Illinois, and made the 4-hour drive to Door County, Wisconsin, where Brian's sister's wedding was taking place. Alicia's mother, Sherry, knew how her boss treated her daughter and begged her not to go to the wedding. But Alicia said she had no choice. She promised her mom she would return the day after the wedding, but she never made it home. On August 19, 2012, Brian Cooper walked into a gas station in Door County and asked the attendant to use the phone. He told the dispatcher that he had taken the life of his pregnant employee, Alicia Bromfield. After the phone call, police officers were immediately dispatched to the gas station. They quickly arrested Brian Cooper and took him to the station for questioning. At the same time, another group of law enforcement officers was sent to the hotel where Alicia and Brian had been staying. It turned out that Brian had booked a room for them at a resort hotel in Door County. But he had lied to Alicia when he told her they would have separate rooms and that the other wedding guests would also be staying at the same hotel. Upon arrival, Alicia sent a message to her mother saying that she and Brian had argued and were about to drive home. She was upset that he had once again deceived her. Alicia's mother, Sherry, was surprised that Brian would miss the wedding. After all, he was supposed to walk his sister down the aisle. Apparently, Brian himself realized that he had behaved poorly and apologized to Alicia, blaming the situation on the resort hotel having no available rooms. The two still ended up attending the ceremony because Alicia was primarily thinking about Brian's sister. She didn't want to ruin the celebration for the newlyweds or come off as disrespectful. Later that day, when Sherry asked her daughter how things were going, Alicia replied that everything was fine and that she and Brian had decided to stay for the party, spend the night, and return the next day as originally planned. The wedding itself went well, and the ceremony took place outdoors. Brian fulfilled his role of walking his sister down the aisle, but his mood was far from good. All evening, he kept replaying Alicia's hurtful words that from now on not even friendship would be possible between them. The officers sent to the resort hotel room in Door County entered and immediately discovered the body of 21-year-old Alicia Bromfield. She was lying naked on the floor, partially covered with a blanket. A pillow had been carefully placed under her head. At first glance, it looked as though the young woman was simply asleep, but upon closer examination of the body, officers noticed injuries, bruises, and scratches, signs that she had tried to defend herself. It was clear that she had fought until the very end for her life and the life of her unborn daughter. Forensic experts were called to the crime scene, while at the police station, Brian Cooper was being interrogated. The man explained that the day before, they had indeed argued over the hotel room situation, and Alicia had planned to go home. Later, she decided to stay so as not to ruin the celebration for Brian's sister. She told him that once they returned home, they would no longer be friends and would cut off all communication outside of work. Brian got angry. Her words hurt him. And that was when he began to think about making Alicia feel the same kind of pain, but physically. Brian told investigators that he and Alicia had been seeing each other and that things had been good between them. He went on to say that he had always wanted to have a relationship with Alicia. He wanted her to be his girlfriend, but since she was pregnant by another man, he claimed he had shown respect and kept some distance. So they went to the wedding, where they took their last photo together. Alicia tried to seem cheerful, but as soon as they returned to the hotel room after the ceremony and the party, she went to bed, wanting the day to be over as soon as possible. Luckily, the room had 2 beds. Meanwhile, Brian kept drinking. He was already quite drunk, but he knew that once they got back to Illinois, Alicia would cut all ties with him. While Alicia slept, he paced around the hotel room, poured himself more alcohol, and went outside for smoke breaks. The rage inside him was building more and more. He was angry at the sleeping girl for rejecting him. No matter what he did, no matter how he acted, she always remained unreachable. Uncontrollable fury took over his entire body. How dare she say she was going to cut off contact? Brian wasn't used to a woman making decisions for him. He was the one with power and control over her, being her supervisor. He was the one who always held authority. The fact that Alicia was now standing her ground, firmly saying she'd had enough, that she was done tolerating the insults and humiliation, inflamed his wounded male ego to an unbearable degree. With every drink he took, Brian lost more and more control. His behavior could no longer be called logical. He was afraid of losing Alicia, yet at the same time he desperately wanted to hurt her, to get revenge, so she would never dare reject him again. He began running through ideas in his head, how best to do it, what to use to take her life. At that moment, it was as if Alicia sensed the danger coming from her boss and woke up. She stepped out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. When she came back in, Brian suggested that after they returned to Plainfield the next day, they should meet up and watch a movie. But Alicia firmly said no. She intended to keep her word and cut off all communication with him. That's when something snapped in Brian's mind. Her refusal pushed him to what he did next. The man suddenly lunged at Alicia, who was sitting on the bed. He straddled her, wrapped his hands around her neck, and began to squeeze. The girl, completely unprepared for what was happening, panicked, and tried to fight back, trying to pry his hands away, but eventually she gave in. She begged him to stop and think about the baby. In her final moments, Alicia wasn't thinking about her own life, but about saving her unborn daughter, Lucille. But at that moment, Brian didn't care. He continued the attack. During the struggle, they fell off the bed onto the floor, and there, Alicia managed to bite his finger, only making him angrier. The man grabbed a phone charger cord and began strangling Alicia until she stopped resisting. Instead of calling an ambulance or trying to save the baby, Brian stripped the girl naked and, in a moment of unthinkable depravity, violated her lifeless body. He told investigators that he had wanted to see Alicia without clothes. After satisfying his vile desires, he covered her body with a blanket and placed a pillow under her head. The next part of his plan was to take his own life. Brian didn't want to face the consequences of his actions. He didn't want to be arrested or go to prison. He would have had to face everyone who knew him and somehow explain what he had done. Drunk, Brian tried stabbing himself with a knife and a corkscrew, but it hurt. He couldn't bring himself to inflict serious harm, so he locked himself in the bathroom and passed out in a heavy stupor. Brian woke up in the morning, stepped out of the bathroom, and couldn't even look at the body of the girl he had pursued for the last several years. Horrified, he left the hotel and headed to a nearby bay, intending to drown himself. Brian swam far out into the water and surrendered himself to the waves, but his survival instinct kicked in. His body fought to live, despite his desire to die. As a result, yet another suicide attempt failed. Sinking into depression, Brian made it to shore and wandered along the beach until he saw a gas station. When he walked in to call the police and turn himself in, water was still dripping from his clothes. That was the story he told investigators after his arrest. When detectives asked if he had ever had similar outbursts of rage before, Brian said that he had never taken anyone's life before. Alicia was his first victim. After the body was discovered in the hotel room, Alicia's family was immediately informed of what had happened. The most devastating part was that unborn Ava Lucille also died in her mother's womb. The grief of the family, who had been preparing to welcome a baby girl into the world, was immeasurable. Brian Cooper was charged with intentional homicide as well as abuse of a corpse. The judge set bail at $1 million. While he was being held in jail awaiting trial, police continued to build the case against him. In addition to Brian's detailed confession, which was recorded on tape, they were able to gather substantial evidence showing that Brian had abused his position and harassed Alicia both at work and outside of it for years. Investigators found further incriminating material on his computer, including several secretly recorded videos. Brian had installed a mini camera in his bathroom and recorded Alicia when she used the toilet after walking his dog. He had also hidden a small recording device in the trash can of the bathroom in their hotel room, filming her naked as she came out of the shower. All of this, and more, confirmed not only Brian's obsession with Alicia, but also underscored how deeply disturbed and depraved he truly was. The girl had no idea that her private moments in the bathroom were being rewatched multiple times. Even the password on Brian's mobile phone was Alicia's date of birth. Despite his confession to detectives, Brian decided to plead not guilty at trial, citing impaired mental state. He did not deny that he had committed the crime of taking the life of a young pregnant woman, but he sought to justify it. Brian's attorneys argued that, due to alcohol intoxication, their client was incapable of understanding what he was doing. According to them, he was too drunk to tell right from wrong. And therefore, Brian could not be held responsible for his actions that night, meaning he should not be held accountable for the death of Alicia or her unborn child. The prosecution, however, found serious flaws in that theory. Citing Brian's own confession, they pointed out that he was able to recall in vivid detail exactly what he had done to Alicia that night, something uncharacteristic of someone under the influence of alcohol. His failed suicide attempts also indicated that he understood the illegality of his actions. However, as unbelievable as it may sound, the jury was unable to reach a verdict, because 2 of the 12 jurors genuinely believed that Brian Cooper's state of intoxication absolved him of responsibility for the crime. Everyone was stunned by the outcome of the trial. This decision meant that Alicia's family would have to endure a second trial. But the verdict shocked Alicia's mother, Sherry, most of all. She was deeply troubled by the fact that the 2 jurors who prevented a conviction were women themselves. Essentially, they had decided that Brian Cooper should not be punished for the murder of a young woman and her unborn child, and the reason? That he had simply had too much to drink. In Sherry's view, with laws like these, anyone could commit a heinous crime and easily escape justice, so long as they got drunk first. She didn't want any other family to go through such pain. She didn't want to see more young lives buried because of violent, intoxicated criminals. That's why Alicia Bromfield's mother decided to take action. Sherry was so outraged by the outcome of the case that she led a campaign to change the laws. Together with other family members and her daughter's friends, she spoke out against the kind of defense strategy that had been legally permitted within the U.S. justice system. Sherry's team worked to spread awareness among the public. They wrote letters to local and higher-level officials. They created online petitions and held meetings with lawmakers in Wisconsin. And fortunately, after some time, the hard-fought battle for justice brought results. In the spring of 2014, about a year and a half after Alicia's death, Governor Scott Walker signed a bill officially banning voluntary intoxication as a legal defense in the state of Wisconsin. Sherry managed to help bring about legal changes in 32 states. However, those changes didn't apply to Brian, since the crime occurred before the new laws were enacted. Because the first jury failed to reach a unanimous decision, Brian was set to face a second trial for the murders of Alicia Bromfield and unborn Ava Lucille. The trial took place in May 2014. As mentioned earlier, Brian's defense team was still allowed to cite intoxication as a mitigating factor during sentencing. At the second trial, the jury once again heard about his disturbing obsession with Alicia and how he had abused his power as her supervisor. They saw the footage from the hidden cameras. They listened to Brian's confession, in which he described in detail his decision to take Alicia's life, despite her pleas and her concern for her unborn child. This time, the jury found him guilty on all counts. Brian Cooper was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. It is more than likely that this man will never walk free again. After her daughter's death, Sherry filed a lawsuit against Alicia's employers. She discovered that her daughter had repeatedly complained about abuse and harassment in the workplace by her direct supervisor, regional manager Brian Cooper. It turned out Alicia wasn't the only one. Other female co-workers had also filed complaints. They too had reported Brian's inappropriate behavior to upper management. Sherry sued the company, accusing them of negligence that led to her daughter's death. If they had responded to the complaints and taken action to protect their employees from Brian's harassment, the girls wouldn't have suffered. The company argued that the crime didn't occur on store property and that they weren't responsible for monitoring employees 24/7. Initially, Sherry's lawsuit was dismissed, but that decision was later overturned on appeal. Having endured 2 exhausting trials, Alicia's mother was determined that no other parent should go through the same ordeal. Sherry felt an overwhelming mix of rage and guilt for not being able to protect her daughter and unborn granddaughter. But instead of letting that anger destroy her, she transformed it. The most incredible part of this story is that Sherry ended up joining forces in her mission with Kelly Stryker. Kelly is a social worker specializing in mental health, child abuse, and domestic violence. But there's more. Amazingly, Kelly is Brian's sister, the very same sister whose wedding Alicia attended before she was killed. Kelly initially testified in court in defense of her brother, and while she had supported Brian, She was deeply disturbed by his refusal to take responsibility for his actions. Yes, life can be that complex. Kelly was moved by Sherry's mission to preserve Alicia's memory and became an inspiration to her. She reached out to Sherry and offered to help with the Purple Project as a way to try to make amends for what her brother had done. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.